since the dawn of civilization, when the darkness of night was illuminated only by the pale light of the moon. Stories of creatures half man, half beast have been with deepest fears. What would drive a man to transform into a wolf? Was it a divine curse cast by angry gods, as in the legend of Lycaon? Or perhaps a secret ritual, practiced in the shadows by those who sought powers beyond human comprehension? In this journey through the shadows of history, we will explore real cases that shook medieval Europe, such as the infamous Peter Stumpp, and delve into the beliefs of Native American peoples, where skinwalkers challenge our perception of the possible. We will see how the figure of the werewolf crossed oceans, taking root in Brazilian folklore with the legend of the seventh son, and how silver became its most well-known weakness. Get ready to uncover the dark rituals that promise transformation. Understand the influence of the church in the construction of this myth, and discover how rural superstitions kept the flame of this creature alive throughout the centuries. From the use of wolf skins by Viking warriors to the cynocephaly of ancient tribes, we will travel a path where reality and fantasy intertwine inextricably. Embrace the darkness and allow your senses to be sharpened. This is not just a story about monsters, but about the very essence of humanity and the shadows that reside within us. Welcome to the world of werewolves. The history of werewolves dates back to ancient Greece, where legends tell of Lycaon, king of Arcadia, who dared to challenge the gods. In an act of pure audacity, he pledged to Zeus himself during a banquet, in an attempt to test the god's power. Zeus's response was immediate and terrifying. Lycaon was transformed into a wolf, condemned to roam the lands as a beast, half man, half wolf. This punishment marked the beginning of stories about men who would become wolves for their sins. But the transformation was not just a physical punishment. Lycaon, in his new form, came to personify the darker, bestial side of humanity, the one driven by primitive instincts and the thirst for power. For the ancient Greeks, the myth of Lycaon represented the internal struggle between civilization and savagery, between control and chaos. The creature he became was a reflection of the worst human impulses, something that many feared to hide. Fear and superstition ruled people's lives, and stories of werewolves were no exception. It was during this period that lycanthropy began to mix with beliefs about witchcraft. Many believed that men and women could transform into wolves through demonic pacts or witchcraft. The mere accusation of being a werewolf was enough to seal a person's fate, leading to cruel trials and often death. Just like alleged werewolves were persecuted, tried, and executed, Europe saw an increase in accusations of lycanthropy, especially in regions such as Switzerland and Germany. These trials were often nothing more than pretexts to eliminate enemies or marginalize people. However, the fear that these creatures inspired was real, and entire communities lived under the threat of the wolf man, fearing that he would emerge under the full moon. The connection between witchcraft and werewolves became a mainstay of European folklore. The idea that one could conjure or tame wolves through black magic gained traction, and lycanthropy came to be seen as divine punishment for those who dabbled in the occult. The church also contributed to this view by associating werewolves with the devil and his followers. This was part of a larger attempt to control the masses, using fear as a tool. Even after the end of the witch hunts, werewolf stories continued to thrive. These tales maintained a balance between terror and fascination, with the figure of the werewolf serving as a reminder of what happens when humans succumb to their worst natures. The medieval werewolf thus became not just a legend, but a symbol of fear of the unknown and the power of chaos over order. In 1589, the small town of Bedburg, Germany, was ravaged by a series of brutal crimes that shocked its residents. The perpetrator of these horrors, Peter Stumpp, a local farmer, became known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. During his trial, he confessed to having made a pact with the devil that granted him the ability to transform into a wolf. According to him, by wearing a magic belt, his body would change cannibalism and witchcraft. His case became famous not only for the brutality of the crimes, but for the terror that his supposed transformation caused in the population. The court that tried him sentenced him to a gruesome execution, those who dared to follow the same path. His trial was an important landmark in Europe, further increasing the panic surrounding werewolves. Peter Stump's case was not isolated. At the time, many similar trials were taking place in different parts of Europe. However, his story was one of the most documented, fueling popular imagination about the real existence of werewolves. The story of Stump's confessions and monstrous transformation traveled beyond Germany's borders, inspiring horror stories for generations. The figure of Peter Stumpp remains one of the best-known examples of the connection between brutal murders and belief in werewolves. His story became an icon of fear rooted in medieval and early modern Europe, when the lines between reality and legend were blurred, and creatures of the night were considered as real as the day. With the European colonial expansion in the New World, it was not only traditions and customs that crossed the ocean, legends also traveled along with them. During the colonization process, European settlers brought with them the fear of werewolves, and soon this creature began to be inserted into the folklore of the new lands. In the American colonies, especially in Brazil, stories of men who transformed into wolves began to mix with indigenous and African beliefs, creating new versions of the legend. In colonial America, the werewolf took on its own characteristics, adapting to the context of the new lands. In Brazil, for example, the figure of the werewolf began to be linked to the belief that the seventh child of a family, especially if it was a boy, was destined to turn into a wolf. Unlike Europe, where werewolves were often associated with a pact with the devil, here they were victims of a birth curse, carrying with them a destiny that they could not avoid. As the frontiers of the New World expanded, so did the fear of werewolves, following the advance of the settlers. The vast forests and unexplored lands provided the perfect setting for these stories to spread, and many claimed to have witnessed transformations or heard the creatures howl in the distance. Nights under a full moon were viewed with suspicion, and it was not uncommon for people to avoid leaving their homes, fearing an encounter with a werewolf. Over time, the werewolf myth became a fundamental part of American folklore, gaining traction in rural areas and isolated communities. The belief that these creatures roamed the night became as prevalent as in any European village, and the New World werewolf continued to haunt the minds of those who lived on the fringes of civilization, where the unknown still ruled. In Native American cultures, legends emerge that, although not directly about werewolves, feature similar creatures. A notable example is that of skinwalkers, shamans, or sorcerers capable of transforming themselves into animals, including wolves. These mystical figures, common in Navajo beliefs, assumed the form of predators to hunt or protect their clans. However, unlike European legends, the skinwalker was not a cursed being, but someone who acquired supernatural abilities through secret rituals. The skinwalker, when assuming the form of a wolf, became a feared and powerful creature. In some cases, he was portrayed as a protector of the clan, but in others, he was seen as an evil being who used his ability to transform to spread terror. These legends were passed down from generation to generation, always surrounded by mystery and fear. Transforming into a wolf was seen as a great feat, but also dangerous, since the skinwalker, in his animal form, could lose control. The contact of European colonizers with these native legends ended up influencing and mixing the two myths. Thus, stories arose of native werewolves, beings that could change shape at night and roam the forests in search of prey. Although the concept of werewolves as a curse was not native to these cultures, the similarities between skinwalkers and European werewolves allowed the two legends to merge in some regions of the New World. Even today, the myth of skinwalkers remains one of the most enigmatic in Native American folklore. For many, these creatures are more than just legends, but beings that still walk among us, hidden in the darkness and shadows. Their existence, like that of werewolves, is deeply rooted in the beliefs and fears of the cultures that created them. As the legend of werewolves spread throughout the world, each culture adapted the myth to suit their own beliefs and environments. In Europe, for example, countries such as France and Germany had their own regional versions. In France, the figure of the loup-garou became one of the most iconic symbols of local superstition, while in Germany, the werewolf gained notoriety during the medieval period, with reports of transformations into wolves during witch trials. In Latin America, especially in Brazil, the legend of the werewolf was modified to fit local traditions. The Brazilian werewolf, for example, is often seen as a cursed man, the fruit of a family line marked by a cruel fate. In some regions, it is believed that the seventh child of a family of sons will be cursed to transform into a werewolf upon reaching adulthood, a belief that persists to this day in many rural areas of the country. In Africa, we find the figure of the hyena man similar to the werewolf, but related to local predators. These creatures are described as shamans who acquired the ability to transform themselves into hyenas to carry out brutal attacks on their victims. This version of the legend highlights how the fear of creatures of the night is something universal, regardless of where the myth arises. These regional variations show that wherever werewolves appear, they reflect the fears and cultural influences of each people. While in medieval Europe the werewolf was a figure associated with evil and the devil, in other parts of the world, it could be seen as a guardian or even as part of a mystical ritual. The myth, therefore, molds itself to the identity of each society. The idea that the werewolf is a cursed creature is deeply rooted in world folklore. Unlike other mythological creatures, the transformation of man into a wolf is seen as a burden, a punishment imposed on those who have committed a grave sin or suffered a misfortune. In Greek mythology, Lycaon was transformed into a wolf for defying Zeus. In medieval Europe, many believe that the transformation was the result of curses cast by witches or dark pacts with the devil. However, in some cultures, the transformation is not just a curse, but also an intentional ritual. Among the Vikings, warriors known as Ulfhednar wore wolf skins to channel the spirit of the animal during battle, becoming ferocious and unstoppable beasts. The use of animal skins as a way to invoke their characteristics was a custom present in several ancient cultures, and many believe that these rituals could grant a man the ability to transform into a wolf. The curse of the werewolf, however, was more than just a physical transformation. Legend had it that, once transformed, the wolfman lost complete control of his actions, guided only by his most basic instincts. He became a threat not only to his enemies, but also to his loved ones. This loss of, whether through curses, rituals, or pacts, the transformation of man into wolf remains one of the most fascinating and terrifying aspects of the legend. The idea that someone could be forced to keeping the figure of the werewolf alive in the popular imagination. One of the most fascinating characteristics of werewolves is their apparent vulnerability to silver, a detail that has become iconic in modern mythology. However, this weakness does not appear in the earliest legends and was introduced more recently, probably during the 19th century. The idea is simple. The werewolf, a nearly immortal and incredibly resilient creature, could be finally defeated by a silver weapon, be it a bullet, a sword, or any object made of this metal. Silver, often associated with purity and moonlight, became the perfect symbol to combat the darkness represented by the werewolf. In ancient times, the use of sacred objects, such as holy water and crucifixes, was also considered effective in warding off supernatural creatures. However, silver brought a new layer of symbolism, uniting the power of a noble metal with the folklore of creatures of the night. In several modern versions of the legend, the werewolf is virtually invulnerable to any attack other than silver. In addition to silver, some legends suggest that werewolves can be harmed by fire or weapons forged in specific rituals. In older cultures, such as the Norse, it was believed that certain spells could reverse the transformation or even free the creature from its curse. However, silver stands out for its permanence in the popular imagination as the ultimate weapon against these creatures, being widely used in films, books, and even games. The use of silver to defeat the werewolf has become so ingrained in myth that it is difficult to imagine this creature without this specific vulnerability. Whether a bullet fired from a distance or a blade used in direct combat, the shine of the metal will always represent the hope that the monster can be defeated, even if only for a short moment. Among the warrior tribes of antiquity, such as the Vikings, there were figures who assumed the strength and spirit of wolves. The Ulfhednar, Norse warriors known for their fierce tactics, were famous for donning wolf skins before battle, believing that this gave them superhuman abilities. Unlike the cursed werewolves of medieval Europe, these warriors transformed themselves mentally, channeling the power and ferocity of wolves to defeat their enemies. These warriors were respected and feared by both their enemies and their own comrades. It was believed that by donning wolf skin, the Ulfhedner gained not only the animal's physical strength, but also its endurance and cunning. They entered a state of battle frenzy, known as Berserker Gang, where they were virtually invulnerable to pain. Although they did not physically transform into wolves, their spiritual connection to the animal made them living legends on the battlefield. This practice was not exclusive to the Vikings. Other warrior cultures also adopted animal symbols to channel the power of predators. In Central Asia, for example, warriors from nomadic tribes wore animal skins for spiritual protection during battle. Although these traditions did not involve literal transformation into wolves, the idea of over time, the stories of these warriors became intertwined with werewolf legends, especially as Viking myths spread across Northern Europe. Thus, the image of the man transforming into a wolf, whether in body or spirit, remained alive, both in stories of indomitable warriors and in tales of creatures cursed by the full moon. Among the ancient legends that inspired werewolf stories, one of the most curious is that of cynocephaly, creatures that had a human body but the head of a dog or wolf. References to these beings appear in ancient texts, such as those of Herodotus and Pliny the Elder, who described tribes of men with dog heads who inhabited regions far from the known world, especially in Asia and the Middle East. For many cultures, cynocephaly were seen as exotic creatures, were also capable of rational thought, forming their own tribes and even participating in interactions with humans. One of the most famous accounts is that of Saint Christopher, who, according to some traditions, was born as a cynocephaly but ended up living among humans and eventually becoming a Christian saint. His story highlights how, even in unusual forms, these beings could find redemption and acceptance. Although werewolves did not transform between man and wolf, as werewolves do, their physical resemblance to wolf-like creatures has led to their legends becoming intertwined over the centuries. In some traditions, they were seen as ancestors of werewolves, or even as a more primitive version of these beings. Their half-human, half-animal habits and behaviors reinforce the idea that the line between man and beast could be easily broken. This fusion of myths helped to consolidate the image of the werewolf as a hybrid creature, not only between man and wolf, but also between the natural and supernatural worlds. The figure of the werewolf, therefore, contributed to expanding the popular imagination, giving rise to new interpretations and variations of the werewolf legend that we know today. In the popular imagination, vampires and werewolves are often seen as mortal enemies, but there are myths that unite them in curious ways. In some, it's a hybrid creature, which possesses the powers of both forms: the brute strength of the werewolf and the immortality and bloodlust of the vampire. These hybrid beings, although rare in older traditions, have found their way into modern narratives, especially in books and films that explore the dark world of supernatural creatures. The concept of a hybrid between a vampire and a werewolf also introduces new layers of complexity to evolve and adapt to newer narratives. The blending of ancient myths with modern elements gives these creatures a new dimension, while maintaining the fascination they have always held in the popular Germany. Peter Stumpp, the werewolf of Bedburg, met a similar fate, accused of murder, cannibalism, and a pact with the devil. These trials, while involving elements of superstition and fear, were often a reflection of the social and political dogs and pigs. This reflects the adaptation of the legend to the natural conditions of the country, where wolves are not a common animal. These variations make the story even more intriguing, reinforcing the role of the werewolf as an adaptable mythological figure, capable of changing according to the geographic and cultural context. To this day, the myth of the werewolf in Brazil persists, especially in more isolated regions. The belief remains alive in stories told around the campfire and in reports of mysterious sightings. The Brazilian werewolf, therefore, maintains its place as one of the most feared and fascinating figures in national folklore. The influence of Christianity on werewolf legends began to take hold during the Middle Ages, when the church sought to impose its morality over pagan beliefs. Throughout this period, the werewolf came to be associated with sin and perdition, seen as a being cursed for transgressing divine laws. The idea that werewolves were punished for making pacts with the devil became one of the bases for trials and persecutions, especially in regions such as France and Germany. The church saw werewolves as creatures that were outside the grace of God, representations of the chaos and temptation that haunted humanity. Many of the medieval accounts that linked werewolves to witchcraft reinforced this view, and lycanthropy was considered, in some cases, a punishment for demonic practices. A man who transformed into a wolf, in the Christian view, lost his humanity because he had distanced himself from faith and redemption. In addition, Christian symbols such as the crucifix, the light of God, was also incorporated as an effective weapon against the werewolf, further highlighting the religious nature behind these legends. With the rise of Christianity, the myth of the werewolf was shaped and reinterpreted to align with the teachings of the church, transforming the creature into a symbol of sin and redemption. This influence continues to be felt in modern stories, where the figure of the werewolf is often seen as a lost soul trapped between two worlds, seeking salvation. In rural areas around the world, legends of werewolves spread rapidly, often adapting to local superstitions. The isolated environment and fear of the unknown contributed to the proliferation of stories about creatures that transformed into wolves on nights of the full moon. In Europe, villages were often plagued by tales of werewolves roaming the countryside, attacking livestock and terrorizing peasants. With each generation, these accounts became more vivid. Local superstitions varied from region to region. In some, werewolves were believed to avoid crosses and religious symbols, while in others, the creatures only appeared on dark nights without moonlight. Rural people took special precautions, such as avoiding going out at night or carrying silver objects with them for protection. In more remote regions, the sound of howling in the distance caused panic, and people believed that the werewolf was prowling nearby. Many of these superstitions arose as a way of explaining tragic events, such as the disappearance of animals or people. The figure of the werewolf, with its violent transformation, was a way of giving meaning to the chaos and violence that often plagued rural communities. Although science and reason eventually dispelled these beliefs, they continue to live on in the popular imagination, fueling stories told around campfires. To this day, in some isolated regions, the myth of the werewolf survives as part of local folklore. It has become a way of preserving ancient traditions and keeping alive the mystery of the creatures that, according to popular belief, still walk among us, especially under the light of the full moon. And so, the werewolf has traversed the centuries, shaped by fears, superstitions, and imagination. Skeptics believe it is just a legend, a story made up to scare people, while those who have witnessed its appearances have never doubted this formidable supernatural creature, which fascinates both those who believe in the existence of the beast and those who do not. If you enjoyed exploring